My name is Frances Townsend, I'm 22 years old, and 2 weeks ago I stood on a graduation stage in front of 3,000 people while my parents sat in the front row completely stunned. Because these were the same parents who once decided my education wasn't worth paying for and believed I wasn't a smart investment. And the reason they were there that day wasn't even for me but for my twin sister, since they had no idea I would be on that stage or that I would be the one delivering the main speech. Yet, this moment didn't begin at graduation at all. It started 4 years earlier in my parents' living room when my father looked directly at me and said words that never left my mind. And before I go back to that moment, if you're enjoying this story, feel free to like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Because now I want to take you back to a warm evening in the spring of 2021 when our college letters arrived on the same day. Victoria was accepted into Whitmore University, a well-known private school costing $65,000 a year, while I was accepted into Eastbrook State, a respected public university with a $25,000 yearly cost that still felt possible. And that night my father called a family meeting, sitting confidently as he announced he would fully pay for Victoria's tuition, housing and everything else, while my mother smiled and my sister celebrated. Then he turned to me and calmly said they wouldn't be paying for my education, explaining that Victoria had stronger future potential and better opportunities, while I would need to figure things out on my own. And although the words didn't hit me right away, the message was clear: I wasn't the priority. Yet instead of crying like I had so many times before over forgotten birthdays, reused gifts, and always being pushed aside, I sat alone in my room and realized something important, that in their eyes I wasn't their daughter but a poor choice, and what none of them knew was that this decision would push me toward a completely different future. Because the favoritism hadn't started that day, it had always been there, from the moment we turned 16 and Victoria received a brand new car while I was given her old laptop that barely worked. Even though I was told money was tight, they somehow always had enough for her trips, her clothes and her experiences, and that pattern quietly shaped everything that came next. Family trips were never fun for me, no matter how hard I tried to enjoy them. Victoria always had her own hotel room, while I ended up sleeping on pull-out couches in hallways or cramped corners the resort politely called a cozy nook. In every family photo she stood front and center, smiling and glowing, while I hovered at the edge, sometimes barely visible, like I didn't fully belong. When I finally asked my mom about it at 17, hoping for honesty, she brushed it off with a tired smile and said I was imagining things and that we were loved equally. But actions tell a different story, and a few months before college decisions, I accidentally saw a message on my mom's unlocked phone that said I didn't stand out and that practicality mattered more. I quietly walked away, but that night I made a private decision, not out of anger but to prove something to myself. Using my old laptop with a weak battery, I searched for full scholarships for independent students, and what I found shifted everything. Sitting on my bedroom floor at 2 a.m., I calculated costs, aid and savings, realizing the gap was huge and my choices were limited and risky. Every option seemed to confirm the low expectations my family had already set for me, and I could almost hear future conversations comparing my progress to Victoria's success. Still, this wasn't about competing with her, it was about believing in myself. I searched scholarship listings for hours, sorting through strict requirements, missed deadlines and false offers, until I found real opportunities, including a highly competitive merit program at Eastbrook and a nationwide scholarship awarded to only a handful of students. The odds were intimidating and I even laughed at how unlikely it seemed, but I saved every link anyway. In that moment I realized I could either accept the life planned for me or build one on my own terms, and I chose to take control. That summer, I filled an entire notebook with careful plans, budgets and schedules, starting with my first job as an early morning barista at a campus cafe. Mapping out every dollar and every step toward a future I would create myself. I mapped out a second job cleaning residence halls on weekends, bringing in about $400 a month, and a possible third job as a teaching assistant in the economics department that could add another $300 if I was accepted. Even with all three, my total income would be around $1,500 a month or $18,000 a year, which still left me $7,000 short for tuition. That missing amount would have to come from merit-based scholarships, the kind earned through effort and results. I chose the cheapest housing near campus, a tiny room in a shared house with 4 other students, $300 a month with utilities included, no air conditioning, no car space and almost no privacy, but it was workable. My days turned into a strict routine. Early morning shifts at the cafe, Classes all day, evenings filled with studying or assistant work, and only a few hours of sleep each night, a pace I knew I would have to maintain for years. Right before I left for college, Victoria shared photos online from a beach trip with friends, smiling and carefree, while I packed a used suitcase with second-hand bedding, fully aware that our paths were already splitting apart. What kept me steady was a quiet promise I repeated to myself every night, reminding myself that the exhaustion and sacrifice were the cost of independence and freedom from expectations I never chose. I didn't yet know how true that would become, or that someone on campus would eventually see my potential when my own family never had. During my first Thanksgiving at college, I sat alone in my rented room, listening through the phone to laughter and noise from a gathering I wasn't part of, my mother sounding distracted and my father unwilling to come to the phone. I assured her I was fine, even as I looked around at my simple meals, borrowed textbooks, and thin blanket, knowing I had learned to expect nothing. After the call, I saw a family photo posted online, showing my parents and Victoria seated at the table with no extra chair, no empty place. I stared at that image for a long time, and something inside me quietly shifted, not erasing the hurt, but reshaping it into resolve that no longer depended on their approval. The pain didn't disappear, it simply emptied out, and in that quiet space I found something unexpected, a clear sense of focus I had never had before. By my second semester of freshman year, I was sitting in Microeconomics 101 with Margaret Smith, a professor known across Eastbrook for her tough standards and long career, someone students genuinely feared. I kept my head down, took careful notes, and turned in my first paper expecting an average grade, so when it came back marked with an A+, I was stunned. Below it was a short note asking me to see her after class, and my stomach dropped as I wondered what mistake I had made. When I approached her desk, she studied me closely and told me my essay was among the strongest undergraduate papers she had read in decades, then asked about my background and family support. Without planning to, I told her everything: the imbalance at home, the lack of support, the long hours, the multiple jobs, and the constant exhaustion. She listened without interrupting, then mentioned the Whitfield Scholarship, explaining what it offered and how rare it was, before telling me plainly that ability only matters if someone is willing to recognize it, and that she would help me be recognized. From that moment on, my life became a strict cycle of early mornings, long classes, endless library hours, and very little sleep. While others enjoyed college life and I focused entirely on building results, maintaining a perfect academic record semester after semester. There were moments when the pressure nearly broke me, including collapsing from exhaustion at work and breaking down alone in a borrowed car, but I always returned the next day and kept going. By junior year, Dr. Smith called me in and told me she was officially nominating me for the Whitfield Scholarship, warning me that the process would be intense and demanding, but reminding me that I had already endured far worse. The application took over my life for months, filled with essays, interviews, background checks, and recommendations, yet by then I understood that this effort wasn't just about funding my education, it was about claiming a future I had earned through persistence and belief in myself. In the middle of all the applications and pressure, Victoria sent me a message for the first time in months, saying Mom mentioned I wasn't coming home for Christmas and that it seemed a little sad. I read it once, placed my phone face down, and went straight back to my essay because the truth was simple. I couldn't afford the trip, and even if I could, I wasn't sure I wanted to return. That holiday, I stayed alone in my rented room with instant noodles and a small paper tree my friend Rebecca had made for me, and without tension or expectations, it turned out to be the calmest Christmas I had ever experienced. Senior year in September, an email arrived early one morning from the Whitfield Foundation saying I'd made it to the final round, and my hands shook as I read that I was one of 50 finalists chosen from hundreds. The interview was in New York, far away, and my bank balance barely covered basics, so travel felt impossible until Rebecca insisted I take a low-cost overnight bus and accept her help without argument. I arrived exhausted but determined, surrounded by confident candidates who looked far more prepared than I felt, until I reminded myself that I didn't need to fit in, only to prove my worth. 2 weeks later, while walking to work, I opened an email that confirmed I had been selected as a Whitfield Scholar, and the weight of years of effort finally broke free as I sat on the curb, overwhelmed with relief and pride. The scholarship covered full tuition, living support, and the option to transfer to a top partner university, opening doors I never thought I'd touch. That evening, Dr. Smith called to congratulate me and explained that transferring to Whitmore University would mean graduating with highest honors and delivering the commencement speech. And in that moment I realized that everything I had endured had led to a future where my voice would finally be heard. That I thought about my parents sitting proudly in the crowd on Victoria's big day, never realizing I would be there too, and I made it clear to myself that this choice wasn't about getting back at anyone, even if it might surprise them. I told myself the real reason was simple and practical. Whitmore offered a stronger program for my career goals, and anything else was just background noise. I made that decision quietly and didn't tell anyone in my family. A few weeks into my final semester, I was studying alone in a quiet corner of the library when I heard my name and felt my stomach tighten. Victoria stood there in shock, struggling to understand how I could possibly be at her school without anyone knowing. I calmly explained that I had transferred on a scholarship and paid my own way, and I watched confusion and disbelief cross her face, followed by something that looked like guilt. When she asked why I never told anyone, I asked her if she had ever tried to check on me, and she had no answer. I left for class after telling her I didn't feel hatred toward the family, only distance, and that night I ignored a flood of calls because whatever came next would happen on my terms. Victoria told my parents right away, and the silence that followed on their end said everything, especially when my father dismissed the idea that I could earn a scholarship at all. The next morning he called me for the first time in years, questioning my presence at Whitmore, and I reminded him calmly of the words he once used to describe me as not worth the effort. He tried to downplay it, but I repeated exactly what he had said, leaving no room for denial. He suggested we talk in person at graduation since he would already be there for Victoria, and I ended the call knowing he finally understood that I was no longer asking for permission or approval, only standing in the place I had earned on my own. That night, I sat alone in my small apartment, the one I'd earned and paid for entirely on my own, thinking about my father's call and the conversation that had unfolded. He didn't remember, or maybe he chose not to, but the truth was he'd never truly seen me. Not really. Yet in 3 months he would, and when that moment came it wouldn't be because I demanded attention, it would be because he couldn't look away. The weeks leading up to graduation carried a strange, quiet tension. I knew they were coming. Mom, Dad, Victoria, the whole family ready to celebrate Victoria's accomplishments, flowers, dinners, hotels, all perfectly planned, unaware of the full story. Victoria had told them I was at Whitmore, but she didn't know about the Whitfield Scholarship, the Valedictorian honor, or that I had been asked to deliver the commencement speech. Dr. Smith called to check in and asked if I wanted her to notify my family. No, I said firmly. I want them to hear it like everyone else. It wasn't about making them feel bad. It was about sharing my truth. Rebecca came to help with the ceremony, picking out my first new dress in 2 years, simple navy blue and elegant. You look like a CO, she said. I feel like I'm going to throw up, I replied. The night before graduation, sleep didn't come. Not from nerves exactly, but from wondering how I would feel seeing them, if old pain would resurface, if I would want them to feel any of the hurt I'd carried. What I realized surprised me. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want them to hurt. I just wanted to be free. And tomorrow that freedom would finally arrive. Graduation morning, May 17th, was bright and clear, almost ironic in its perfection. Whitmore Stadium filled quickly, families, balloons, flowers, and excited chatter everywhere. I slipped in early through the faculty entrance, my black gown accented with the gold sash of Valedictorian and the Whitfield Scholar medallion gleaming in the sunlight. I took my place in the VIP section, front and center, honor students' seats reserved for speakers. Across the stadium, Victoria was busy taking selfies with friends, unaware of my presence, while dead center in the front row sat my parents. Dad in his navy suit, Mom in a cream dress clutching a massive bouquet, completely oblivious to the story I was about to tell on my own terms. Between my parents sat an empty chair, likely meant for coats or handbags, never meant for me, just like it never had been. My father adjusted his camera, focused and ready to capture Victoria's big moment, while my mother smiled proudly and waved to someone nearby, completely unaware of what was coming. They looked confident, prepared, and happy, certain they knew how this day would unfold. When the university president stepped to the podium and the crowd fell silent, I sat still with my hands folded, knowing that in just moments everything would change. The ceremony moved slowly through speeches and formalities until the president returned and announced the Valedictorian and Whitfield Scholar, praising resilience, excellence, and character. My mother leaned toward my father and he raised his camera toward Victoria, expecting her name. Then my name was called. For a brief second the world seemed to stop. I stood and thousands of eyes turned toward me as I walked to the stage, my honors clearly visible. From the corner of my eye, I saw my parents' expressions shift from confusion to recognition and then to stunned silence, while Victoria stared in disbelief. As applause filled the stadium they remained frozen, finally seeing me clearly for the first time. When I spoke, my voice was steady as I shared how I had once been told I wasn't worth the effort, how I learned to expect more from myself when others expected less, and how I built my future through long nights, hard work, and belief. I didn't blame or accuse anyone because I didn't need to. The message was simple and honest. The greatest gift I gained wasn't money or praise, but the strength that came from believing in myself when no one else did. It was the first time I realized I could define myself without needing anyone's approval. In the front row my mother was crying, not the happy tears you expect at a graduation but something heavier, almost grief. My father sat frozen, staring at the podium like he didn't recognize the person standing there. Maybe he didn't. I paused, letting the moment settle, and said quietly, for anyone who's ever been told you're not enough, you are. You always have been. I scanned the audience. Graduates who had struggled, parents who had sacrificed, friends who had believed, and yes, my own family sitting like statues in the front row. I was here not because anyone believed in me but because I learned to believe in myself. The standing ovation that followed shook the stadium, 3,000 people cheering for someone they'd never met. As I stepped down I saw James Whitfield III waiting to congratulate me, but the real surprise was the crowd pressing forward, handshakes, smiles, congratulations everywhere. Then my parents came through, moving like they were wading through water. Dad reached me first, his voice hoarse. "Francis, why didn't you tell us?" I took a sip of sparkling water, calm. "Did you ever ask?" His mouth opened then closed. Mom arrived, mascara streaked, whispering apologies. Kept my voice even. "You chose not to see. That's not fair." He tried to argue but I simply reminded him. He had told me I wasn't worth the investment, spending millions on Victoria and leaving me to figure it out alone. Mom reached for me. I stepped back. "I'm not angry," I said honestly. "But I'm not the same person who left your house 4 years ago." Dad's jaw tightened. "I made mistakes," he admitted. "You said what you believed." I met his eyes. "You were right about one thing. I wasn't worth your investment, but I was worth every sacrifice I made for myself." He flinched. At that moment James Whitfield III extended his hand. "Miss Townsend, brilliant speech. The foundation is proud to have you." I shook his hand while my parents watched, seeing their daughter, the one they dismissed, recognized as extraordinary by one of the nation's most prestigious scholarship founders. For the first time they grasped the full weight of what they had missed. After Mr. Whitfield moved on I looked back at my parents. They seemed smaller somehow, diminished. "I'm not pretending everything's fine," I said. "Because it's not." Mom whispered, "Can we just talk as a family?" "We are talking," I replied, firm but calm. "I have a job in New York. I start in 2 weeks. I won't be coming home." Dad stepped forward, voice strained. "You're cutting us off just like that." "I'm setting boundaries," I said, steady and unshakable. "There's a difference," I said calmly, and when my father asked what I wanted from them, his voice breaking as he admitted he felt lost, I finally understood something important. I thought carefully before answering because for the first time I could be completely honest. I told him I didn't want anything from them anymore, and that was the point. If they wanted to talk someday, truly talk, they could call, but whether I answered would depend on their intentions. My mother cried and said they loved me, and I told her that love isn't proven by words alone, but by the choices people make, and theirs had been clear. Victoria stepped closer, awkward and unsure, congratulated me, and I thanked her, offering no dramatic reunion, just a simple promise that we could talk sometime if she wanted. I walked away without rushing, not escaping, just moving forward, and Dr. Smith was there, smiling quietly. When I told her I finally felt free and truly meant it. The effects of that moment spread quickly as people at the reception began realizing who I was and what I had accomplished, leaving my parents forced into uncomfortable conversations they couldn't explain away. Friends praised my story online, assuming my success came from strong support at home, and my parents had no honest response. Days later Victoria called, admitting regret and apologizing for never asking how I was doing, and I told her I didn't hate her because I didn't have the energy for that, only the desire to move forward. When she asked if we could start over, I thought about everything we'd both lived through and agreed to try, not out of obligation but because growth sometimes starts with honest acknowledgement. 2 months after graduation, I stood in my new apartment in Manhattan, ready to begin a life defined by choice, clarity, and freedom rather than by anyone else's expectations. It was a tiny studio, just one window looking out at a brick wall and a kitchen the size of a closet. But it was mine. I'd signed the lease with money from my first paycheck at Morrison & Associates, a top financial consulting firm in the city. Entry-level position, long hours, steep learning curve, but I had never felt more alive. That Saturday Dr. Smith called. "How's the big city treating you?" she asked. "Exhausting, exciting, everything they warned me about," I said. She laughed. "Sounds about right. I'm proud of you, Francis. I hope you know that." "I do," I replied. The next weekend Rebecca visited, surveyed the tiny space and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You did it, Frankie. You actually did it." One evening a letter arrived in my mailbox. Handwritten, 3 pages, my mother's familiar looping script. She admitted her failures, her regrets, and how watching me on that stage made her realize she had been looking at a stranger, even as I was her daughter. "I see you now. I see who you've become. I'm so sorry I didn't see you sooner," she wrote. I read it twice, folded it and tucked it in my desk. I didn't reply, not yet, not as punishment but because I needed time to decide what I truly wanted to say. For the first time the choice was mine. Looking back, I realize I used to think love was something you had to earn, that if I was smart enough or successful enough my parents would finally notice me. 4 years of struggle taught me otherwise. You can't force someone to love you correctly and you can't wait forever for validation. At some point you have to see it yourself. I built this life, my apartment, my career, my friendships, not out of anger but necessity. Their rejection didn't break me, it rebuilt me. The girl desperate for approval no longer exists. In her place is a woman who knows her worth and doesn't need anyone else to confirm it. Sometimes I still think of the empty chairs, the family photos without me, the money spent on my sister while I scraped by, but that hurt no longer controls me. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't excusing someone else's failures. It's releasing your own hold on the pain so you can finally move forward. I'm not fully there yet, not completely healed, but I'm working on it, and for the first time I'm doing that work for myself, not to make anyone else comfortable or to keep the peace. 6 months after graduation my phone rang and I saw my father's name, and I almost let it go unanswered. Almost. When I picked up, his voice sounded tired and different, and he thanked me for answering even though he knew he didn't deserve it. He admitted he'd been thinking every day since graduation and still didn't know what to say, so I told him to speak honestly. After a long pause he said he was wrong about everything, not just the money, but the way he treated me and the years he stayed distant, admitting he had failed as a father. I listened quietly and finally told him I heard him, nothing more, because it wasn't my job to explain how to fix what he had broken. He accepted that and said I was right, sounding older than I'd ever heard him. I told him I wasn't offering instant forgiveness or pretending things were fine, but if he truly wanted to try I was willing to listen, and that would have to be enough for now. We talked a little longer, not solving anything, just beginning to clear the space between us, and it wasn't forgiveness but it was a start. 2 years later I'm still in New York, still working at Morrison & Associates, now with 2 promotions and an MBA starting this fall paid for by my company. I remember the version of myself who lived on instant meals and 4 hours of sleep, and I carry her with me every day. Victoria and I meet for coffee once a month, slowly learning how to be sisters as adults, and when she finally apologized for never noticing what I was missing I told her the truth, that she didn't create the system, she just benefited from it. My parents visited New York for the first time last month, awkward and emotional, but they showed up in the life I built on my own, and that mattered. I'm not ready to call us a family again, but we're building something new step by step, and last month I wrote a check to the Eastbrook State Scholarship Fund, closing one chapter by helping someone else begin theirs. $10,000 anonymously awarded to students without family financial support. When I told Rebecca she cried. "Frankie, you're literally changing someone's life." And she was right, someone changed mine first. I thought about Dr. Smith, the early morning coffee shop shifts, the night I bookmarked the Whitfield Scholarship thinking I'd never win it, and how far I've come, and how far I still want to go. If any part of my story resonates with you, If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told you weren't good enough by the people who should have loved you most, I want you to hear this. They were wrong. Always wrong. Your worth isn't defined by anyone else's recognition. It's not a number on a check, a seat at a table, or a place in a photo. It exists whether anyone sees it or not. I spent 18 years waiting for my parents to notice me and 4 more proving I didn't need them to. What I finally learned is that the approval I was chasing could never fill the emptiness inside me. Only I could do that. Some of you are estranged from your families, some are still fighting for scraps of attention, and some are just realizing the love you've been given isn't the love you deserve. Wherever you are, it's okay to protect yourself, to set boundaries, to put yourself first, and to forgive only when you're ready. You don't need anyone to confirm what you already know. You are enough. You always have been. Look in the mirror and say it aloud. I am enough. That's the first step. Everything else is up to you. But I believe in you. If a girl once told she wasn't worth the investment can stand on a stage in front of 3,000 people as a Whitfield scholar, you can do anything. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about what resonated most and subscribe with the bell so you don't miss our next story. There are more family drama stories waiting for you in the description below.